And now, covering the ongoing fight for the heart and soul of America, broadcasting from deep in the heart of Texas, it's David Knight.
Welcome back. I'm David Knight. We're going to be talking to Todd Macfarlane in the next segment. And at the bottom of the hour, we're going to be talking to Lionel, will be joining us. I'm also going to try to get into Trump at NATO in this hour in between the two interviews. And a final comment on what was just said by Eugene Warwick. As I was saying, we have the Brady ruling from the Supreme Court saying you cannot hide evidence that is in the favor of the defense because it would kill your case. and that is certainly something that is very important. If Eugene's case is heard, I think we will have something like the Warwick rule that says you cannot withhold the transcripts and the audio tapes of the trials from people. And, of course, they're not only withholding them, but he found evidence that they were altering these things, the corrupt people in Chicago. But it's very important that we be allowed to confront our accusers, as they stopped New Jersey Weed Man from doing that. They said, oh, you try to confront your accuser, or you try to find out who this guy is, you're tampering with a witness. You know, kind of like what they're doing to Paul Manafort right now. They did the same thing with New Jersey Weed Man. You don't have to be a famous person to be a target of political persecution. Eugene Warwick, New Jersey Weed Man, and, of course, people like Paul Manafort as well. And so that's one of the reasons why we do have an opening right now with President Trump. He's seen this kind of corruption firsthand. He's experienced it. He's been the target of it. It's very important for us to shut this down. Now, as we talk about political corruption, let's talk a little bit about what Michael Chertoff, the first, I think he was the first director of Homeland Security. This is the guy that was put in by George W. Bush. And, of course, he was the guy who, after he left Homeland Security, he went to work for a company that started making body scanners. And as we've reported, you know, those body scanners, we had to put body scanners in right away because at Christmas time, we had the underwear bomber. Remember that underwear bomber? And we had a lawyer who was on that plane. What was his name? Kurt something, I think. Anyway, he's been on, I've interviewed him multiple times. He's been on many times with Alex Jones and Haskell, I think it was. Kurt Haskell, was that it? Anyway, he witnessed what was going on. He saw a guy with a suit put this underwear bomber on the plane. And he watched everything that was going on. The guy was out of it. And, you know, they said, oh, you don't need to see. This is not the droid you're looking for. Put him on the plane, says the guy in the suit. And this guy looks like he's, been pulled off of living on the streets and pulled off the streets. And so Kurt Haskell pointed that out. And they played all kinds of games to keep him from testifying in the trial of the underwear bomber. Nevertheless, they used that false flag attack. And it was a false flag attack, folks. You look at what Kurt Haskell told us about that. They used that false flag attack to roll out the body scanners. And guess what? All the body scanners were already ready to go in this company that the former Homeland Security director had become chief of. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that nice? You know, sometimes the circumstances just aren't believable. And now we've got Michael Chertoff back in the news again. He has written a book, and he's talking about our privacy. And he says it's too late to protect your digital privacy. I guess it's too late for the Fourth Amendment as well, you know, and any privacy. You know, the airport, he's made sure that we don't have any privacy there. He says we're actually surveilling ourselves, said Michael Chertoff in an interview. He says we're doing a lot of collection that we used to imagine would be the government done as individuals. Oh, yeah, that's right. It's Facebook became their surveillance technology. So we go around, we photograph each other, we upload things to the internet. That's why we actually have become little brother in the place of big brother. Yeah. Oh, what a revelation. Maybe it was a revelation to the people who watch CBS. As I pointed out with the Snowden documents, the NSA was actually trolling us, talking about Apple and the 1984 commercials, and who would have thought that they would make Big Brother and that it would be this phone and that people would line up to buy it. And, of course, they got you all where you wanted to take all these pictures of yourself and put them up on the internet by creating TV programs and even calling them Big Brother. Are we stupid or what? We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Todd Macfarlane. He is with an organization called ProtectTheHarvest.com. We've talked to Todd in the past about issues of land use. What happened with the Hammonds is a very political case. It was a case of political persecution. Todd Macfarlane had been involved somewhat in that case. We're going to talk to him about his involvement, what he knows about it, but he is also an attorney for over 25 years. He is a seasoned veteran of the conflicts between ranchers and the federal government over land and resource issues and over property rights in the West. And he writes for Range Magazine, and also I think the website, or he can correct this if I'm wrong, I think that website is rangefire.us. So joining us now is Todd Macfarlane. Todd, is Range Magazine, is that the website for it, rangefire.us?
Right. Well, so you've got Range Magazine, which is a hard copy magazine. It has a website, but Rangefire is the affiliate blog that I write quite a bit for as well. One thing I do want to just kind of clarify, I don't work for Protect the Harvest. I have worked with them. That's an organization that has taken a leading role in trying to make something happen with respect to the Hammonds, and they've devoted a lot of time and effort and resources to that cause, as well as Trent Luce with Rural Route Radio. But I don't actually work for them, but they've been part of the coalition that has worked hard on this effort.
And that's an important part of this story, too. The fact that we've had so many people come out for their neighbors, and not just because they see the injustice of this case, but because this is a broad issue that affects a lot of people in a lot of states and a lot of industries. It's ranchers, it's loggers, it's miners, it's anybody who works on the land is being affected by this overreach by the EPA, by the BLM, by the National Forestry Service, and so forth, aren't they?
I think that's exactly right, David. I think a lot of people, especially those who are involved in, kind of productive enterprises out here in the West, and you've kind of summarized what a lot of those are. But a lot of times, at least in my world, I've started to distinguish kind of between producers and consumers. And I think that people who are in productive enterprises and they really know what it takes to try to produce something in this world, they can relate to this and they can understand the injustices. So a lot of people have come out of the woodwork from kind of that sector that have just said, this is just flat wrong. This is so unjust to see this happen. And they've rallied around this cause, what happened to the Hammonds. Yeah. To see if it might be possible to somehow roll this back. And to be completely honest, for the longest time, even after President Trump was elected and everything, I think we wondered if it was really going to happen or not. So,
yeah. There's a lot of inertia.
When it did
one of the things we have to give President Trump some slack on, and I understand this. I'd like to see some things done. I'd like to see him done quicker, but he has moved quickly on some things. Other things have taken a lot of time. Other things we still haven't seen the moves that we want to see made. But there's a lot of inertia. Right. It's like a giant ship, and you can't just turn it on a dime like a small ship. You got to gradually slow it. You got to gradually turn it around. This is a massive bureaucracy, and there's a lot of inertia in it.
Well, and it's not like there aren't all kinds of issues that his administration has to deal with, including global issues and much bigger picture issues. So in the overall scheme of things, this is kind of a fairly small issue that is very near and dear to some of us, but you do have to, as you say, put it in perspective of the overall big picture. So I think that is important.
And I would put it in a different perspective, too, to make sure that people understand. Because when we look at issues of due process, this affects everybody. And that is really what is at the essence of this Hammond thing. I mean, we've got a judge coming in. The essence of the political persecution was mandatory minimum sentencing. And I want people on the right who understand property rights and so forth, I want them to understand that the mandatory minimums that they may support in the drug war are what the same types of things that were used to come after these people when the judge on the scene who knew what was going on said, there's nothing here. We're not going to persecute these people. No, the Obama administration came in and said, I've got a political agenda here, and I'm going to use the mandatory minimums to put them in jail for 5 years. So due process issues, getting rid of the Brady showing everybody the evidence that as they did with the Bundys and everything. These are issues that affect all of us, whether you are urban or rural, whether you're a producer or whether you are an eater. It affects all of us, doesn't it, Todd?
I'm really glad you pointed that out, because when you get down to the core fundamental issues, they really do affect all of us. And when you see how those kinds of issues, those laws that don't fit the due process scheme of things, can be used to persecute one group or these individual ranchers, it can be used that way to persecute anyone who, they want to use as a target. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, when you no longer have the rule of law, then the power of the government becomes arbitrary, and it becomes authoritarian, and it turns against anyone. And President Trump is experiencing this himself personally. And so it is a big issue. It is a fundamental issue, even though he's in NATO right now, and he's talking about the big trade issues and everything. But it even affects the president when we have a corrupt Justice Department, when they get rid of due process, when they target people politically.
Well, and I don't know how many people are aware of it. Maybe you've talked about it before, but Justice Gorsuch actually came out with a really interesting dissenting opinion in a case this spring where he talked about the injustices that result from these vague and ambiguous laws that allow judges to just engage in arbitrary decision-making. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. And his position is we need a lot more precise laws that don't give these administrative agencies all this room to engage in retaliation and arbitrary and capricious application and enforcement of the law. We need something a lot more precise.
And another part of this is the fact that we have these bureaucracies. You're talking about regulations and so forth. They maintain that if it is a bureaucratic regulation, that we don't have the same due process that we have if it was a crime that was done by Congress. And so we have, as Rand Paul has pointed out, and he's tried to stop this several times with what he calls the REINS Act, we have a situation where Congress has abdicated its lawmaking procedure to the bureaucracies. But when the bureaucracies make a law, when the unelected bureaucracies make a law, they call it a regulation. And then when they accuse you of violating that regulation, they say you don't have any presumption of innocence and these usual standards of due process don't apply. And so that makes the expanding bureaucracies all the more dangerous. And that's what people out in the rural areas are seeing. But we're seeing it in so many different areas because, it started with the IRS and it's metastasized into all these different areas as well. As the case you're just talking about, Gorsuch talking about that, people have said about the IRS when the rules are sufficiently complex, it's the same as having no rules at all. And that's been a problem with the tax code for a long time, but now it's become a problem with environmental regulation and many other things.
You're absolutely right. It's just out of control from my perspective.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the efforts to, we got about a minute, a little bit over a minute. Tell us about some of the people besides, you talk about Protect the Harvest or some of the other individuals that came together to make this happen. Because when I was at the Bundy Ranch, it was people who had come from Utah, people had come from Arizona, people had come from Nevada. They were the last ranch that was there. All the other over 50 ranches had been driven off of the land by the BLM. And these other people coming in here and saying, we got to take a last stand on this. Tell us about some of the groups that came together for the Hammonds to lobby. And
it's really hard in that amount of time, David, to hit, to give all the credit that where credit is due. But importantly, I think it's really important to understand the role that Protect the Harvest played in kind of taking the lead, as well as Hammond's own congressional representative, Greg Walton, up there in Southeast Oregon.
Yes. Just
never gave up. Fought for them to the bitter end. Guys like Trent Luce with Rural Route Radio, again, never gave up.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for joining us, Todd Macfarlane. And again, thank President Trump, all of you who are listening. Thank the congressmen and others who stood for this. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and in this segment, before Lionel joins us at the bottom of the hour, I want to talk a little bit about NATO. At the top of the Drudge Report right now, there's a picture, NATO cracking. And this is going to be a classic picture, folks. This is like the picture that you saw when they had the G7, and Trump was sitting there smiling, and Angela Merkel was leaning forward on her arms, was so upset, and the body language is there. The body language here is also great. Everybody is very, very upset. You've got Theresa May holding her hands down there like, oh, very tense. And President Trump is in the middle just smiling away. Why is he smiling? Well, because he's been proven right. Again, We have Germany's soldiers using broomsticks for guns, and they are not training at Hogwarts, folks. They're not using their broomsticks in that way. They painted broomsticks black to use them as pretend rifles. And I wonder if they were going pew, 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 pew. This is something that, you know, we had a friend, and she was very anti-gun. And she was upset about the fact that I not only allowed but encouraged my sons to play with guns, toy guns at the time. And they don't play with guns. They played with toy guns, but they now have real guns, and they don't play with them. But anyway, she was very concerned about that. She didn't want her kid playing with guns. And then she said at one point in time to my wife, she said, you know, it's just something about boys. I saw my son, he was running around with a stick in the backyard going, pew, 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 pew. She says, I guess it's innate. I guess I better stop fighting it. She eventually won, though. She turned him into a mama's boy. But I imagine that was what was happening in Germany. They were running around with their black broomsticks going pew, pew, pew. The general, Harold Kujat, a former chief of staff of the German armed forces, later described it as a huge embarrassment. You think? He said the unit was supposed to be ready to deploy whenever a NATO member was threatened. You know what? Like the TSA, there is no NATO threat. There is no threat to NATO. NATO is the threat. I'm going to lay that out to you if I've got time here. They are the threat to peace. In 2015, it also emerged that the German military was using ordinary civilian Mercedes vans as stand-ins for armored personnel carriers. Did they put a pretend turret on top of the Mercedes limo as they're The Times reported today that all six of Germany's submarines, all six of their submarines, folks, were recently put out of service at the same time due to various repairs. Now, here's a suggestion. Call Elon Musk. He's got a submarine that nobody wants to use. Maybe he can give you a loaner on that, cut you a deal on it. The German's Navy inspector said, it does not frustrate me, but it is very annoying. I don't know what the difference between frustration and annoyance is. Maybe it's a distinction without a difference. The exercise is going to test their response to an invasion of Romania. And the question remains, by whom? Who wants to invade Romania? This is the essence of this, folks. As RT says, the uneasy alliance, the transatlantic partners are facing contentious NATO summit. That's their headline. They said combating mistrust and not terrorism. The usually scripted snooze fest this year summit has been billed as a showdown between deeply divided allies. Yeah, they're combating mistrust. We don't trust them. We don't see a need for their mission, but we're supposed to trust them. You know, trust them. There really is a real threat. No, really there is. Yeah, it's those Russians. You know, the Russians are threatening us. They say Britain has been playing the Russian threat card to boost unity among its allies. You know, things like the false flag gas attacks. And they just conveniently had another one just before the NATO meeting and then the subsequent meeting between President Trump and Putin. You just had Theresa May put out another phony false flag attack. This time, they killed somebody. First time, nobody died from the nerve gas, a Novichok that is 8 times more potent than nerve gas. Yeah, give me a break. Anyway, I've talked about that many times. I'm not going to go into it. Here is what President Trump is talking about. Only 8 of NATO's 29 members, and that includes the United States. So let's say that 7 of the other 28, only 7 of the other 28, that's 25%, are spending the 2% of their budget. And let's look at it a different way. 74% of NATO's entire budget was paid by the U.S. And this is money, folks, that is basically going to the military-industrial complex. I think we should rename NATO. You know, NATO is an acronym, North American Treaty Organization. So just change the name NATO to MIC, M-I-C, Military-Industrial Complex. That is the reality of this. Basically, NATO, if they've got a mission at all, is to use the United States government as a foreign legion to create wars throughout the Middle East and Africa, because that's what is really happening. And so as we look at the, Mercedes that are pretending to be assault vehicles, all 6 of the submarines in the German Navy not being there, them running around the military exercises using broomsticks as weapons and so forth. Germany is reported to have less than 20 operational tanks as well. Canada's armed forces appear to be smaller than the New York City Police Department. This is what, that's bad in 2 different ways. Number one, it's bad that we have a standing army in New York City, writing tickets for people and so forth. But the real issue is, who are they defending against? Russia's military budget was down last year 17%. 17%. Meanwhile, our increase in our U.S. military budget was equivalent to their entire budget before they cut it. I mean, this is incredible. Who is threatened? Is Russia threatening Europe, or is Russia threatened? Russia has got a lot more on their table. Not only that, they are in military spending. They're below the U.S., of course, below China, below Saudi Arabia. See, the military-industrial complex has got a brand new customer in Saudi Arabia, and they would like to have more sales in the European Union. And that's really what this push to get them to spend more money is about. There is no threat, certainly not from Russia. Russia has to defend itself from China, from North Korea, from the Middle East. All these areas are on their border. As a matter of fact, when you look at all of these countries that are on the southern border of Russia, it's what I think it was Gary North that used to have the phrase chaos stan, because they're like Pakistan and this stan and that stan, Uzbekistan and everything. I think what we ought to call it is Islamistan, because that's what it really is about. But I want you to hear a little bit of this back and forth between President Trump and the NATO secretary at breakfast in Brussels to give you an idea of how this is evolving. Here's President Trump.
It's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries. And then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia, where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia.
All right, hold it there because we've got to go to a break. Lionel's going to be joining us in the next segment. Basically, what he's saying here is not only are we financially subsidizing you, but you have made yourself dependent on energy with the people that we're supposedly protecting you from. Is there really a threat? Let's understand that there really isn't a threat. They try to make a case that it's about nerve agent of gas attacks in Great Britain, or they're subverting us through our social media. Give me a break. This is so pathetic. The Russian threat. Okay, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Lionel's coming up at the bottom of the hour. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and joining us now is Lionel. Last time we talked, it was still not known who the Supreme Court justice was going to be. And, of course, you had the left lining up to protest whoever it was going to be as the most dire threat to democracy and to women's lives that had ever occurred. Take a look at the statement from the Women's March, as everybody is pointing out, that when they put out their response to President Trump's nomination of XX, they already had the template put in there, and they tweeted it out, how XX being nominated to the Supreme Court is a death sentence for thousands of women, says the Women's March. And then they, as I said yesterday, I'm sure that as they immediately had that press conference and rally there on the Capitol steps to protest President Trump, and they were standing there with their Stop Kavanaugh signs, and said, I'm sure they had those printed up for all the different rumored nominees, and now we have the photographic evidence because they threw the rest of them on the ground and walked away like good environmentalists. They just threw the signs on the ground and walked away. So we got the Stop Kethledge, Stop Hardiman, Stop Kavanaugh. All the signs are right there. You can see they had them all printed up. So it really is kind of a template, and there's a lot of rage that we see here, Lionel. But of course, we do have a particular person to talk about. What is your take on President Trump's selection of Kavanaugh?
He's going to be good. A couple of things. First of all, let me just, a couple prefatory words, if I might. I never miss your show any day.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, never, ever. You are appointment TV, whatever you want to call this. That's number one. Number two, I want to say this before we forget. I hope somebody listens, remembers what you said initially in your first hour or so when you were talking about how minimum mandatory legislation has completely changed. And you said, and to those of you and your hagiographies about Reagan understand that this is what you have, because that is far more important and far more critical to the lives and well-being of many members of this republic than Judge Kavanaugh. Yeah. That being said, this is much ado about nothing. Can I just bring everybody up to speed? Whenever I talk to people, my wife and I have this routine down. Somebody will say, well, this guy, the Supreme Court guy, this guy is, and you could tell they have no idea. And I said, which decision of Judge Kavanaugh do you think was most problematic? Which of his over 250 published opinions do you think was most problematic for you? Which one in particular? Give me roughly what, and they have no idea, as evidenced by the signs and the like. David, these guys, these folks, these men and women at that level will argue about cases that nobody will ever, Lester Holt would ever discuss, or anybody. Let me give you an example, if I could. Just bear with me on this one. There was a case involving the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Oh, yeah, they got Elizabeth Warren very upset because that's her baby.
Right. Now, if you read it, if you told somebody, now listen, you, Mr. Al-Qaeda, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to waterboard you, or we're going to make you read this decision. They'll say, give me that water. It's 250 pages. It's an en banc masterpiece monster. This is what they talk about. Article 2, whether the presentment clause, or it is wonkish. It is the driest. It is very scholarly. And he lost initially, basically, and then later on was pummeled. Now, unless you grasp this notion that not you, but the royal you, don't know anything about what these justices and judges deal with on a regular basis, go to scotusblog.com or just read what cases are granted a cert on or regarding. Look at what the Supreme Court says. That's a good one. We're going to take that one. And you'll read it and you say, what the hell does this even mean? To the federal rules of civil procedure. So what I'm saying is that this is, despite what people think, a very, and I hate that word wonkish, but it's a very technical type and
that's as it should be. But then we do have the situations, which is one of the things that I'm concerned about with Kavanaugh, like Obamacare. The fact that we had Chief Justice Roberts write both the concurring and the dissenting opinion on the Obamacare, whether it was constitutional or not. And the one that he went with was what Kavanaugh had written, saying, call it a tax, and then we can push this mandate on people. Yes. And that has had big effect on everybody. So, the Supreme Court does have effect on some broad policy issues. Or if we look at the situations out west, we've been talking about the Hammonds, talking about the Bundys and so forth, the Brady violations. We had the case come up before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, which we would all say, well, duh, that seems like a fundamental principle. You can't withhold evidence that's going to show that the people are innocent. And that was a case called Brady. But still, as you point out with the mandatory minimums and so forth, even though the Supreme Court makes its rulings, we still have the Department of Justice doing this stuff and nobody is ever punished for it. And it never changes, it seems like. You will never figure out, it's like, how in the heck did this right wing, like somebody said this morning, I was doing a kind of a debate with a law professor, and he said, well, the extreme right wing. I said, what is extreme right? What does it even mean? First of all, 1 minute you say he's a right winger. Then he's basically upholding Obamacare, which nobody understands. Now, you're going to have to make up your mind. Burger King used to say, have it your way. Well, say, make up your mind. Is he an extremist? Is he this? What is it that you're talking about? But let me go back a little bit more. David, this Constitution is the worst piece of prose. Let me tell you the way
The draft.
Yeah, I just like those first 10 amendments. The rest of it, I don't really care about.
Well, you know, the Bill of Rights. No, that's the critical part too. But let me go back and explain it. Some of these things need the presentment clause. Oh, you'll be going. There are people who've devoted their entire law review articles on this. But let me tell you the way these people would have come up with the rules of tennis, written as they wrote the Constitution. There is a game involving a ball that's hit back and forth over a thing which you might call a net. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. Be fair. Use reasonable care in determining the point structure. We're not even going to tell you how to keep points. And as far as if you have a referee, that's okay. We're not. So you're going to get done. You're going to say, I don't even know how to play tennis. Yeah. I don't know what people. I don't know. There's some obvious stuff. And what's interesting is that when it's very clear, the president, Article 2, 35 years old, 14-year resident, and a natural-born citizen, then we say, well, I don't know what that means. It's so vague. No, that's not vague. That's not vague. And you have to go through this. And also, David, the good news is, I guess, to my rambling, is that we're going to do just fine. Yeah. For these folks,
it's not going to be the end of the world. All the women in the world are not going to die that are because of Justice X.
Right. You know what it's like? It's your name here. Remember when you go to a party, it says, "Hello, I'm you."
That's what he should do when he goes for a swearing in. He should have a name tag, right. XX on there, just for the Women's March.
XX is, of course, the female chromosome. And by the by, love the bumper music. As the City Sleeps, Chicago.
Yeah, that's right.
Very
good.
Right. Okay.
We got to take a break, and we're going to be right back with Lionel. Always informative, always entertaining. And I want to get his take on the other responses from the Democrats. We've got Chucky Schumer saying, he's dangerous. He's going to obstruct the Mueller investigation. Are you serious? I mean, this is what they have resorted to in the Democrat Party. It's why their support is in free fall. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Lionel. You can find him on YouTube, Lionel Nation. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Lionel. You can find him on YouTube, Lionel Nation. You can find him on Twitter, @Lionel Media. Lionel is always interesting in what he has to say and entertaining, but especially when it comes to legal issues, because Lionel is a licensed trial lawyer. He actually knows what he's talking about. Many of us have opinions, but including Supreme Court justices, but Lionel has legal opinions. Lionel, your opinions are legal. So I want to get your legal opinion on the narrative that is coming out of the Democrats now, because this is coming from Chuck Schumer. So I think this is going to be one of the key lines of attack against Kavanaugh. And what they're saying is, as ABC News is reporting, Schumer says that President Trump, this is what they tweeted out, nominated Brett Kavanaugh because he's worried about Special Prosecutor Mueller trying to subpoena him and will take actions to advance the Russia probe. President Trump knows that Kavanaugh will be a barrier to preventing that investigation from going there. So that's Chuck Schumer's conspiracy theory, and he's going to stick with it, I think, in the confirmation hearings. What do you think?
Well, first, I would say if you're counting on that, that means that Justice Kavanaugh will have to be one of 9 judges who eventually gets to the issue of whether the investigation should proceed. This is the same fellow who, by the way, thought a president could be impeached for lying. This is the same person who basically, was involved in the Vince Foster case too, which he really needs to be talking about. Yeah. So let me get this straight. He gets in and they're going to say, don't worry, Trump. No problem. We're going to rule. How are you going to rule? You're the Supreme Court. Well, in case somebody brings us a case which would ask us to rule on the dissolution or preventing Trump from testifying, from a man who basically was really part of the Ken Starr investigation, who holds near and dear to his heart the benefit and the necessity of these kind of investigations. You see what I'm saying? None of this makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, we heard from that millennial legal scholar who considers that she's already been elected to Congress, and that's Alexandria Cortez. You know, she's touring Capitol Hill and so forth. And, of course, it's a heavily Democrat district, so she may be a shoo-in when the election comes along. But she was saying this guy is unqualified because he says you can't indict the president. And it's like, that's not the way it works. Maybe she should read the Constitution before she takes the oath, because they have to impeach him. Then they have to have in the House, and they have to have a trial in the Senate. And then after that, if the guy had committed crimes, then he's no longer president. Then you can come after him and you can indict him for crimes that may have caused him to be impeached in the first place, right?
And the reason why you cannot indict a president and remove him via indictment versus the prescribed, impeachment is because Trump would be indicted so far. They would. The drafters were smart enough, and they said, "Wait a minute. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to indict anybody. They're going to undo the franchise. So you know what? Let's make it so that fine, you can indict him. Like for example."
You can indict anybody. You can indict a ham sandwich. So you think they would indict the president because of politics? I mean, he would be doing nothing but sitting in court day after day defending himself because you can indict somebody and then start the trial, right? The
great Saul Wachtler gave that line. You can indict anybody. A good prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. And by the way, it's so funny. He says, out of all the things I've said, that's what I'm known for. But so that people understand this, the drafters of the Constitution realize and recognize that we want to preserve this franchise. And if we allow somebody to be removed from office, imagine this, Mike Pence, then he's indicted. Okay, then Secretary of State, and he's indicted. And then he's indicted. And then pretty soon we're going to it makes complete and total sense. Listen, I love this fact that this young, brave 28-year-old is driving the Democrats nuts. She is, let her talk. Please encourage her. Very good. Louder. Say this louder. And have Harris and Hillary says, oh my God. Now let me just throw in two. You want to be conspiracy theorist, David? I know that's what you are. You and your tin foil hat. By the way, I use aluminum. We haven't used tin in years. Two things. Number one, why is Hillary Clinton all of a sudden flying coach? What's going on with that? Were her assets seized? Is that something after that December executive order? Or is she setting herself up to prevent her from being indicted so that when she says, I'm running for office, and then Trump says, well, my Justice Department would like to have a word with you. Oh, great. So you're indicting me because I'm running. No, we had this already. This was unsealed. This indictment.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So that's
to inoculate herself. Yeah. And I'm not sure if she was in coach. They were flying commercial, but I thought they were in first class. I thought he was sitting there reading a book about the abduction of a teenage girl, fantasizing about the good old days and the Epstein flights, when they could abduct little girls and fly.
That's like having a book that says how to kill your wife and get away with it. I mean, I'm saying, do you care about this? But the other thing, too, was regarding this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is you want her to come in, and Hillary says, listen, you go through nuts. You just become nuts. Go crazy with this leftist stuff. Why? So I'll turn to the feds and say, the Dems, and say, now you need me to tack us back to the middle. And Hillary also was going to say, remember one thing, the reason why I lost was because of Russian collusion. They did it to me once. Remember, that meme and trope is still there. And if we ever get to the truth about Seth Rich, which is something altogether, that would completely derail that. So I've got so many of these little possibilities, left, right, who does what, because right now, David, I will tell you this, that to be a Democrat now is to be clinically insane, because what's happening right now is instead of, let me give you an example. I know you're a big World Cup guy. I know. You're a World Cup guy. You're into it. You're still whatever. I think France. Well,
I don't know the World Cup from a coffee cup, but go ahead.
Let me tell you how we could go to the World Cup the way Democrats do politics. We're going to paint our face. We're going to put a big wig on, and we're going to scream, and we're going to overturn cars, and we're going to yell, and somebody was going to say, excuse me, do you know what's happening? You and I would say, no, of course not. We don't want to know the rules. We just want to react.
Yeah.
See, we don't care how this is done. We just like this and breaking windows. But don't you want to know about the semifinals? No, I don't care about semifinals. I just want to join this band, this murmuration of violent, hooligans, because I enjoy the scream. That's what today's Democratic Party or the
Antifa people, right?
Right,
they just had I reported on it earlier. They just had a law put through by some, suggested by, it hasn't been put through, approved, but they had 4 legislators in the GOP say we need to have a prison sentence if you get violent with people while you're wearing a mask, because this is what the Antifa does. And, but if we're going to paint our face, Lionel, they've found that the most effective way to avoid facial recognition is with the Juggalo clown makeup. That's actually stumbled on something. So important safety tip for you there when you want to go incognito in New York, because there's cameras everywhere.
I'll tell you this much. I know women here in New York who have that Jocelyn Wildenstein, Bride of Wildenstein, plastic surgery, flat affect plastic look. By the way, in the state of Florida, where I prosecuted, there was a law against, by the way, wearing a mask. There she is.
Yeah.
Imagine saying, I want to look just like that. But, and don't hold back, doctor. Anyway, so missing the point completely. No, it's not that they're wearing a mask. It's that they're violent.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Before we start hearing the music, let me just explain. Ladies and gentlemen, oh my God, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please.
Was that Ted Cruz? I don't know.
This Constitution, this thing, as poorly drafted as it is, this thing is, these cases, we're going to do just fine. The judiciary is Article 3. The most important, I hate to say it, is the Congress, legislative. Number 2 is the president, Article 2. And number 3 are the people who theoretically call balls and strikes. If I was a Supreme Court justice, I would be so horrible, because I would say, your problem is not with the courts. Your problem is with the legislation that either wrote this stupid law that you want us to overturn, or maybe you want us to create something. You should be going there. Let me repeat this.
That's the problem. And it is, they have the authority under the Constitution that they can override the Supreme Court if they want. But they don't want that, because they don't want the responsibility. That's why they have shuffled off their responsibility for writing our laws to the bureaucracy. And then they say, well, it's not even a law, it's a regulation, so you don't have any due process. Spot on as usual. Thank you for joining us, Lionel. And again, you can find Lionel on YouTube, Lionel Nation, and you can find him on Twitter @Lionel Media. Thank you for joining us. That's our program for today.